And so you can't be running around telling people that everybody's the same and still keep your orderly household. It just doesn't fit. Slaves and masters were worshiping together. And they didn't know exactly what to do. And so in the letters, particularly to the Gentile churches, Paul referenced the household codes which were so prevalent and were just part of the way things were done. But he altered them. He took the brave and bold step of speaking directly, in his writing anyway, directly to the submissive pairs. He spoke directly to the wives, spoke directly to the husbands, spoke directly to the children, to the fathers, spoke directly to the slaves and to the masters. He altered what was the common, accepted norm of society. You see, household relationships in Christ were based on the new law, the law of Christ. And it was a far different law, and it made fundamental changes in the way that things worked. Now, William Barclay, he talks about these as being, as calls this the ethic of reciprocal obligation. You see, under the household codes of Aristotle and the Romans, everything flowed one way to the father. Everything flowed one way to the male head of the household. All the obedience, all the honor, all the respect, everything went that way. But in reality, respect is a two-way street. Obedience, love, honor, and respect is a two-way street between family members. It doesn't just go all one way. And so let's take a look this morning for a few moments at how this works with parents and children. Ephesians chapter 6 opens up with, children, obey your parents in the Lord. Now let's make an assumption here. Let's assume that the parent has the child's best interests in mind and doesn't demand anything unseemly like going out and committing a crime. I found out it was interesting, or I noted with interest anyway, a few weeks ago that there was a burglary, whatever it is. They were breaking into houses and taking stuff, okay? There was a whole bunch of them were happening just the other side of 18th Avenue in a particular several block area. And I found it interesting to note that once they caught the folks, it was a middle-aged mother and her adult son. And I'd say there's something wrong with that mom's parenting skills. She's not quite teaching the right things. So I'm not sure if your mom or dad wants you to go steal something, I'm not sure that you necessarily have to obey that. But let's assume that the parent has your best interests in mind. So how do you live as a child? First of all, obedience is expected and deserved as part of the home and family relationships. Obedience is expected and deserved. Obedience honors God. And if we claim, even as kids, as children, as teens, if we claim to honor Christ, if we claim to be in Christ, then we need to act like Him whose life was characterized by obedience to His Father. Now, that's a tough pill to swallow sometimes, especially when you're getting up 14, 15, 16 years old. And you begin to think, you know what? This is my life now. It's going to be different. And it is. But obedience honors God. Obedience and honor directed towards parents establishes a well-ordered life in society. Look at verse 2. Paul is quoting, actually he's quoting Deuteronomy, but it's the fifth commandment. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. One of the components of a well-lived life is to understand early who's in authority. You see, we deal with authority all of our lives. And I go over this many different times, not necessarily in my own mind, but sometimes preaching and so on. There's always going to be somebody telling us what to do. When we're young, it's our parents. When we get a job, it's our boss. And how many people have foolishly quit jobs because nobody's going to tell me what to do? Well, nobody's going to feed you either. And we get older, it's the doctor telling us what to do. And then when we really get old, it's the kids telling us what to do. Yeah. Obedience and honor. One of the components of a well-lived life, particularly for a child or young person, is to understand that obedience and honor on many different levels is part of that life. Now, obedience changes over time, but honor continues. It's a lifelong attitude and practice. A child, adolescent, or adult have different levels of obedience. My oldest son turned 37 years old yesterday. I don't think I'm going to try to tell him to clean his room. I'm still bigger than he is. But I think if push came to shove, he could push. And I would be shoved. It changes over time. But that honor and that respect that goes between child and parent is a lifelong attitude and practice. Now, sometimes, if we find it difficult to honor the person, and yes, there are too many parents that are difficult to honor, but we honor the position. Well, let me give you some advice. Regardless how it seems, honestly, truly, your parents do have your best interests in mind. 95% of the time. Yeah, you got to give room to blow it, but 95% of the time, 90%, 99% of the time, whatever. They have your best interests in mind. So that's one. Second one is giving obedience and honor is right. It's the right thing to do as we are growing up in a household. And particularly for a Christian young person, one who testifies to being a Christian, respect for parents and authority validates our Christian witness. And I know there are struggles, I know there are, hassles, there are difficulties, and all that goes along, that mixes in with growing up. But if we are habitually in rebellion and conflict with those who gave us life and give us a home, it pretty well negates our witness for Christ as a child, as a young person. Well, then Paul goes on, and he flips it a little bit. And he says, parents, don't exasperate, but nurture. Don't exasperate, but nurture. Create an atmosphere in which obedience and honor come almost naturally. And that begins way early on. Create an atmosphere that is such that obedience and honor are almost the logical thing to do. Simply because that's the way it is. Now here's some don'ts that I want to give you this morning, parents. Don't abuse your power. Parents have an awful lot of power. They really do. Children come into this world helpless, defenseless. And parents have an awful lot of power. All the way through. And lots of times that power is abused. It's abused verbally, to berate and to demean, and to discourage, and to squelch, and to destroy.